Let's talk about making your very own patterns. It's a question I get all of the time, and honestly, I didn't quite know how to answer it until a few weeks ago. And thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. We'll talk more about their services later on in this video. Whenever I create a pattern, I use my experience and what seems right and all of that to make my patterns. I eyeball it, I visualize it in my head about like what certain pattern pieces should look like, and then I go from there and I create the pattern. So yeah, it's sort of hard to factually explain that process until I discovered a new method process that has actual steps and it takes no guesswork or envisioning the pattern, and I would go as far as to say it's easy. This will be incredibly useful if you want to replicate a costume that you really like, or you have a design in your mind that you really want to put into fabric, or whatever the case may be. It's when you want to turn fabric into a specific pattern. And this method is going to show you a pretty easy way of doing that. I first used this method when making my high fashion red carpet black widow dress. The bodice is made of all these weird tiny pattern pieces, like really weird. And honestly, I didn't know what each piece should look like, so I just kind of invented this method. I honestly hesitate to say invented because I'm sure many other people use it already. I just have never seen anyone use it, and I didn't have any outside influence when I thought of it. Anyway, if you've used it before or have seen it, then yay. But if this is the first time, then welcome to my currently favorite method of making your own patterns. The best thing, there's only two main things really needed. First is a basic block pattern. Now, the great thing about block patterns, one, it doesn't have to be this exact pattern. You can find all sorts of basic block patterns on the internet, and there's just a lot out there. And the second great thing is you'll never need to buy another pattern for future projects. I probably shouldn't have said never, because there might be situations where it'd be better to buy a different pattern, etc. But in general, this will not only save you from buying a ton of patterns over time, but also time. This pattern can be used for any project, no matter the type of pattern you're wanting to create. You don't have to find a pattern that has the right lines for whatever. Then you'll need some mock-up fabric. This can be old fabric, scrap fabric, or in my case, an old sheet. The first step is to make this basic block pattern. Check your measurements to the pattern, make any basic adjustments you need to make in order to make the pattern wearable. You're not really worrying about a perfect fit right now. You just want to cut the pattern out, sew it together, and be able to wear it. I recommend erring on the large side versus small when making this basic block. It's easier to make fit adjustments, which will be the next step, when the pattern is slightly larger because you have that room to take things in. I like to do a center front opening no matter what, even if the costume I'm trying to make has a back closure. It makes fitting the mock-up by myself a lot easier because I can just pin up that closure. Of course, in saying this, I decided to make this one with a back closure, which is funny, but anyway, it's fine because my mom can help me pin it up. Once this basic block pattern has been made, now is the time to fix any fit issues. You'll also want to wear whatever undergarments you'll be wearing with the costume or project you're making under this basic pattern. This is where you want to take in the darts or the side seams or the shoulder seams in order to create a smooth fitting pattern. Don't think of the pattern you're trying to create, just focus on making this basic block pattern fit you well. But also keep in mind how you want that finished project to fit you. So it's kind of a tricky area. You want this pattern to fit you similarly to how you want the costume you're trying to make to fit. For example, the Cinderella dress, and the one I'm making, is a very tight fitting bodice, so I want to make this basic pattern fit me in that same way. And that's why I'm also wearing the corset that I'll be wearing with the dress. But say I want to make a dress that's just more loose fitting, it's not really tight against my body, it's just kind of loose, In that case, I would make this basic pattern fit me in that same way. I would leave ease, I would just make sure it's kind of loose fitting and just kind of how I want to feel in that finished dress that I'm trying to make. Once you've adjusted the pattern and you're happy with the fit, make sure all the pinned places are sewn, and then of course double check your fit to make sure it all transferred correctly. Don't be afraid to take extra time on this step. Not only will it help make the final pattern better, but you'll also be able to use this basic pattern that you've just created for future projects. We'll talk about this later on, but just trust me when I say it's a good thing to spend extra time on this step. It'll save you later and later. Moving on to the next step. Put your adjusted basic pattern on a dress form and pull up your reference photos for your costume or design or whatever and start drawing the lines on the basic pattern. Yes, you heard me right. Find the seams of your costume and draw them on this basic pattern that you've just adjusted, made you fit perfectly. Draw the new lines that you want the final costume to have on that fabric. And don't worry about the current seams of this basic pattern. Just draw the seam placement exactly where you want it to be placed. This is also when you'll want to draw the neckline, waistline, or just any other details you'll want on the final pattern. Once all the lines and details have been drawn on, it's time for the next step, which is just to cut it up. Cut along your drawn lines, again with no regard to the basic pattern seams, just cut along those drawn lines. What you'll end up with is several pattern pieces in the desired shape of your final costume. And all that needs to be done is to have seam allowances added to those pattern pieces, and there you have it. For most of your pattern pieces, that's all that will need to be done. At this point, I like to trace my new pattern on paper. They might need a few small adjustments, something like to the length or to smooth out a crooked line or something like that. There are some circumstances that may need a little more work to get that final pattern to work. So if you happen to have a pattern design that has all the darts on one specific pattern piece, and you obviously just can't flatten that out and then create the same pattern shape without the darts, if that makes sense, that's probably the most technical thing you'll run into with this method. Unfortunately, there's not a perfect answer for how to fix that problem. So the problem of having all the darts on one piece, but you don't want the darts there. But anyway, each pattern that you're creating will be slightly different in how you should fix that problem. But here is a method that will usually work for most patterns. So grab that cutout piece that has the darts and some paper and lay the smooth part of the pattern against the paper and trace that smoothed out part on the paper. Then slowly flatten more of the pattern out, trying not to stretch the fabric, and then trace the small part that is now laid flat. As you can see, this part is starting to wrinkle, but that's okay because you've already traced that part of the pattern. You just continue this process around, slowly layering out the pattern, each little section, getting it smooth, tracing it, moving on to the next, which is kind of disturbing the one part you just traced. But it's getting that whole shape that the pattern's creating with those darts onto the paper. So you're getting that volume that you have with those darts in that fabric piece sort of worked into a flat pattern, but without the darts. I do recommend focusing on this particular pattern piece in the next step to make sure it's doing what it needs to do. It's sort of a modified thing now. But don't let that part of this process worry you. If you know your pattern will have a piece like this, you could always find a basic block pattern that has a different arrangement of darts where it wouldn't cause a problem, or just a regular pattern that has similar seams to the one you want to create, and just do the whole process with that pattern. So anyway, back to our cutout pattern. Now is the time to cut out your new pattern and create a mock-up of it. Just remember to add that seam allowances to all the edges. So here is my pattern with all the new seams. As you can see, I made some adjustments to that front area just to get it to fit better, but overall, the seam placement is looking good. And now, just like I would do with starting any other project with an actual pattern, I will make a few mock-ups to make sure everything is fitting the way I want to. But I mean, I made this pattern from scratch. I was able to get all those lines on, and now I have a pattern that I can create a mock-up and finalize the project with. Don't leave yet. The best part about this process. You know that basic block pattern that you fit perfectly at the beginning of this process? Once you've done that, save that adjusted pattern, and now you'll have a basic block pattern that perfectly fits you. You can completely eliminate that part of the method the next time you want to create another pattern. Just pull out that basic block pattern, make a mock-up, and just go straight to drawing on the lines you want. And if you sometimes have a pattern worn with a corset, and ones worn without, and ones that are more loose-fitting, you can just make separate basic block patterns for those, and now you'll have different starting points for different projects that you want to create your own pattern for. And that's the process. No guesswork of what shape will be correct for the pattern, no draping, no pattern grading, just sewing and drawing. Before we end this video, I do want to say this may not be a one-size-fits-all method for creating patterns. It might not work for how you like to sew or how your brain works, but I think it's a great way to get into creating your own patterns without having to know all the formal ways of doing that. So I hope this was helpful, and yay, I'm so happy that I was able to share a way to more easily create your very own patterns. Have I convinced you to give this method a try? Maybe? Let me know if it worked for you if you do try it. By the way, for this particular Cinderella dress, there will be a pleated piece of fabric placed on that front section, and that will complete this pattern making process. But because that has nothing to do with fit, I didn't go into it in this video. Huge thank you to my patrons and YouTube members, I have YouTube memberships, for their amazing support. I never want to take you all for granted, so just thank you so much for your amazing support. Now a message from this video's sponsor, NordVPN. They are a VPN provider, which I just learned stands for Virtual Private Network. This is a service that protects your internet connection and privacy when you're online. And seeing as I run my business online, and with so much more working from home happening around the globe, VPN is a great thing to have to protect your data, but also allows you access to servers worldwide. You can decide when you want to connect, and it's just with one click. NordVPN is supported on all major platforms and is the fastest VPN service. Go to nordvpn.com/Bellamaze or use the code Bellamaze to get a 2-year plan plus a bonus gift with a huge discount. You can also just find the link down below in the description and start protecting your online presence. Again, it's nordvpn.com/Bellamaze. Thank you for sponsoring this video.